Pinocchio, where do you want to start?
Maybe with Geppetto's, like a differential as to why we see Pinocchio as a real boy, or like as coming to life.
All right. So the first observation actually was focused on Geppetto, right? So we're going to ignore the low-hanging fruit. What the heck is going on with Pinocchio? And focus more on the creator. So, any guesses as to where you would start with regard to a case formulation of Geppetto?
I guess we could start with that biopsychosocial approach. So with bio, could there be some sort of substance use? Because we did see him smoking a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So again, if we're going to identify what's going on with Geppetto, I would assume we're going to approach this as a case of psychosis. I mean, not everyone thinks that inanimate objects come to life, right? Which is why this is a nice movie to pair with Maximum Overdrive. And I'm wondering if what's going on with Geppetto informs what's going on with Bill in Maximum Overdrive, because both are struggling with the same problem, and that is maladaptive animism. Right? So again, animism is a defense mechanism. It's a subconscious process, specifically of the ego, where individuals impart real life characteristics to inanimate objects. For instance, a puppet. And what might be going on in Geppetto that allows him to experience his puppet as a real little boy. And while that definitely would be in the psychotic spectrum, the direct and physiologic influence of substances inducing that psychosis has to be at the very top of our list. He does smoke. Anybody have a sneaking suspicion that what he is smoking in that pipe is not tobacco? And we definitely want to get a urine drug screen. All right. If, in fact, well, put it this way, what in this film, if included, would have heightened our suspicion that that UDS would have come back positive for cannabis? What, if included in the story, would have increased our clinical suspicion that the urine drug screen would come back positive for cannabis? Anything? Possible hallucinations, which I'm going to actually say are there. Anything else? About these speakers. I apologize. We got something wrong on our end with the speakers. I don't know if it's a Wi-Fi thing. So I have to backtrack. If you have an idea, put it up in the chat room. I will repeat it for purposes of a recording, so no worries there. We're having difficulty with the speakers. Yes, good. Absolutely. Is there any evidence that Geppetto has the munchies? I didn't get that. That would have been nice, though. That would absolutely.
They had a big dinner.
Yeah, the feast.
Yeah.
When?
Right before they set out to find Pinocchio.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say well, feast. The feast.
But then he didn't eat it. He left.
But he did prepare like more than enough for that and a fish and a human.
What did the fish have? A cake? Nice.
We would not expect cannabis intoxication to include abnormal sleep patterns. Not to say that it can't. Lower energy, slower motor skills, sure, okay. Paranoia, definitely. Paranoia, definitely. And I can see paranoia being part of the description of this character. I'm looking for conjunctival injection. I didn't see it. I don't know. Does he have any red eyes?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but they're just droopy. I just searched.
He's like 107, so I don't know.
Yeah.
We're online now checking to make sure there's any conjunctival injection.
Just.
They do look a little droopy. I think it's just because he's old.
They are goofy, dude.
Need some more collagen.
Yep. And the other thing, I mean, we're not going to find it with regard to the film, but tachycardia is something you should keep in the back of your mind too. All right. And the other is dry mouth, cotton mouth, and I don't know. I'm not sure we actually see that either. So, unfortunately, I don't have a high clinical index of suspicion when it comes to cannabis use or cannabis intoxication. So let's say that the urine drug screen does come back, it comes back negative, right? Which would be consistent with our suspicion. Is there a way that tobacco can actually induce perceptual disturbances? So the first answer would be no, not directly. That is, while there is a condition that is labeled or diagnosable as cannabis-induced psychotic disorder, there is no such disorder attributed to nicotine or tobacco. There's no such thing as a tobacco-induced psychotic disorder. But there may be a way that tobacco does it indirectly. So it's not captured by the American Psychiatric Association with regard to the DSM, but there is an indirect way that tobacco could induce perceptual disturbances. And there's a couple of things in this movie that very significantly support this. So even though it's indirect, we need some things to be in place, and oh boy, are they in place here. So any idea what I'm getting at?
Could it be withdrawal symptoms?
So the idea was withdrawal. The answer is not directly. There is no currently identified tobacco-induced withdrawal mental disorder, including psychosis. So nicotine can't induce any mental disorder, whether it's intoxication or withdrawal. It can't.
Could nicotine activate something else?
Exactly right. Nicotine's going to activate something else. And what nicotine activates can, in fact, cause perceptual disturbances. And it can, in fact, induce perceptual disturbances in the middle of the night. So what might be going on here? So this is, again, is a warning about smoking before bedtime. So this gets to a discussion of another drug, which is not overtly observable in Pinocchio, called ayahuasca. And I don't think that we actually have our protagonist using ayahuasca. I don't know, does he drink tea? Is there a scene where he's drinking tea? I mean, that would be helpful, because ayahuasca is usually brewed as a tea.
I think he only drank like ocean water.
But that's even after, though, he sees the blue fairy. Yeah, we need him drinking tea before the blue fairy. That would be perfect. Now, there's a teapot there. Yeah, I'll post that on Instagram. The rest of the world will have no freaking idea why we're posting teapot or Chicago on Instagram, but this group knows that ayahuasca is usually brewed in the tea. Now, if you drank ayahuasca tea right now, what is likely to happen?
Throw up. Oh, nothing.
Nothing. Why?
There's no nicotine.
Right. It's not active.
It activates the DMT,
Yeah.
right?
Ayahuasca, when simply brewed in tea, when ingested, is not psychoactive. The ingestion is of an inactive constituent that is activated once you actually take it, which is why when natives use ayahuasca in spiritual ceremonies, they actually put a vine in the ayahuasca. And that vine contains something called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And that monoamine oxidase inhibitor activates the ayahuasca. I don't see any vines in this cabin. Other than the vine, other than the MAOI, what else can activate ayahuasca? And Alexa got it. Smoking. Exactly right. Nicotine activates this. So even though we see a teapot, we might assume that he's brewed ayahuasca tea, and him smoking that pipe just prior to bedtime serves as evidence as that ayahuasca becoming active as DMT in the middle of the night. What happens when DMT surges in the middle of the night?
Hallucination?
Yeah, visual hallucinations. And exactly right. Alexa posted it. Isabella posted it. Perceptual disturbances in the form of visual hallucinations. And what happens to our poor Geppetto? He actually has a visual hallucination of a blue fairy. And matter of fact, he has some insight when he sees that blue fairy because, number one, it's terrifying, which is very consistent with the ayahuasca-induced visual hallucinations, very terrifying. And number two, he yells out, "I'm dreaming," which is true. What ayahuasca does is it desynchronizes sleep so that during periods of micro-arousals, 3 a.m., the individual is REMing when you should not be. During a micro-arousal, you're in stage 2 of sleep, which is an earlier stage of non-REM sleep. But if you have some desynchrony and your stage 2 overlaps with an episode of REM, not only will you have the micro-arousal characteristic of stage 2 sleep, but you'll also have active dreaming as well, and that will manifest as a wakefulness visual hallucination. And that's exactly what happens here. What else can cause this? I mean, forget psychiatry for a second and forget addiction psychiatry for a second. If you hear people talk about this in folklore, what's going on? Being visited in the middle of the night.
Possession, maybe?
Huh? Possession? That would be a concern.
The Fae?
Yeah, this gets to the Fae mythology, right? Fae or fairy mythos. Many people believe that at 3:30 in the morning, the veil between our universe and a stacked universe, that of the Fae, is at its thinnest. And therefore, some of these creatures can invade our universe and our experience. If that's the case, if Pinocchio the film may actually be taking advantage of the Fae mythos, any guess as to what type of fairy that blue fairy is? It's like what, 50 to 100 of them. What type? Who's who's the student that emailed me before? And I forget. I apologize for getting your name. That was interested in Fae mythology. I don't know if they're actually on this call. What's the call? I don't want to pick on anybody, but any guess as to what Fae or fairy this is? And yes, if Fae invades your bedroom, I think most people would deem that as a haunt. I don't think anybody would consider that to be a normal occurrence. So I think one of the Faes that I would consider here is called a changeling. Anybody here familiar with a changeling? Changelings are fairies that abduct children and in their place leave a doppelganger. So now all of a sudden there's a couple things to consider here if we revert back through the lens of a psychiatrist. And that is the doppelganger syndrome, otherwise known as reduplicative paramnesia, which is a type of delusional or psychotic syndrome. The delusional belief that your current situation and your immediate environment exists in two places simultaneously. And perhaps here the bridge is that doppelganger, as well as the individual, that little boy, perhaps named Pinocchio, that was abducted by the Fae, who is now in a Fae universe, a stack universe. What are changelings notorious for leaving behind in replace of the abducted child? It's usually a block of wood called a stock. And of all things, Pinocchio is a block of wood. So, and yes, these are evil fairies. These are not fun, loving, cuddly fairies. So that kind of reframes what's going on here. Was Geppetto the father of a young boy that was abducted? And is he of the belief that his little boy named Pinocchio was abducted by a changeling? And instead of our looking at this as like a Pygmalion complex where we have a wood carver that creates a puppet and due to loneliness wishes that puppet wishes upon a star for that marionette to come to life. Maybe instead he is wishing that that stock that was left behind by the changeling was really his son who he misses. Now, if Geppetto came to us with that chief complaint, we would probably have some difficulty believing him. And what would our guess to the true reality of what he's talking about be? Let's say, in fact, we called the proper authorities and it was confirmed that Geppetto once did have a little boy who went missing. I mean, would any of us here really believe that a fae, that a changeling, abducted the little boy named Pinocchio? Instead, what might have really occurred? Go ahead. This gets to the other conspiracy theory we discussed about what Pinocchio was really about, and that's human trafficking. Right? Yep. Exactly right. He either died, and Geppetto is in denial with regard to accepting the death of a young boy, which absolutely could happen, or that he was abducted in real life. And if you go with that second option, you do know all over the internet, there is a conspiracy theory that this cartoon is about human trafficking. And what Pleasure Island really represents. So we're not going to go there, but suffice it to say that our conspiracy theory matches up very well with the pre-existing conspiracy theory regarding the depiction or the deciphering of Pinocchio as a fictional case of human trafficking. Any other thoughts about Geppetto?
Maybe toxin exposure due to the materials he's working with.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about tobacco. It's probably worthwhile reminding ourselves that when we think of substance-induced, in this case psychosis, substances can be drugs, including tobacco, including DMT. It could be, that is, substances could be medications, no evidence really there. It could be herbal therapy, and it could even be toxin exposure. And for a wood carver, with all that paint, toxin exposure also should be high in our differential diagnosis. So paints are solvents, and the vapors of solvents are certainly one of the 4 classes of inhalants that can lead to neurotoxicity. That would include perceptual disturbances. So we would have to work that up and definitively rule that out as well. So yeah, toxin exposure. And this here is an occupational hazard, given his being a painter as well as a wood carver. About 20 minutes to go, so let's switch gears a little bit and just keep with the main characters in each of these films, those that actually manifest or demonstrate animism, and switch over to Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive. And it's Bill, right?
Bill, yeah.
With a B or a PH?
B.
B, yeah. Let's look at Emilio Estevez's character, Bill, as another case of maladaptive defense, specifically animism. Now, Bill doesn't look at a marionette movie that comes to life. There's a whole convoy of trucks that Bill struggles with regard to animism. And as such, this film is also one that can be formulated as a case study of psychosis. So, what other observations do we have with regard to Bill?
People as we talked about yesterday in our podcast, we discovered that we thought he could be suffering from a possible panic attack disorder, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, anytime we mention the word psychosis, I would suggest that clinicians work through the gold standard psychotic disorder called schizophrenia. And by doing that, we remind ourselves that this condition called schizophrenia is a diagnosis of exclusion. And one of the 5 different illnesses that we have to consider and rule out in order to rule in schizophrenia is a mood disorder. And I think there are aspects of this film that call into question Bill experiencing an acute manic episode. So I think there are definitely psychotic symptoms here. And right now, we have to consider whether those psychotic symptoms are due to the primary mood disorder called bipolar affective disorder, for instance, a manic episode, or if they are otherwise due to the psychotic disorder called schizophrenia. And you know, from that perspective, I'm not really sure there's much more to say about that, because I don't think there are any characteristics, signs, or symptoms demonstrated in this character that allows us to tease that away today. I do think that we need to write a script for the prequel, and I think the prequel would give away whether or not we're dealing with bipolar versus schizophrenia. And that's exactly what we would do with regard to a real patient history. We take a past psychiatric history to tease that out. So the idea that as part of Bill's psychosis, he does seem to have a fixed belief that is grandiose in nature, mindful that grandiosity or grandiose type is one of the 5 basic subtypes of delusion. The others covered earlier in Seifeld include JPEGs, right? Jealous type, persecutory type, erotomanic type. The G stands for grandiose, which again, I think is focused here on Bill. And then the S stands for somatic type. Having identified that, and I absolutely believe that's true, I think there's a hero archetype here. I do believe that's true. That doesn't really help us with regard to whether or not that delusion, now specifically that grandiose delusion, is in the context of schizophrenia or in the context of bipolar disorder. That is, the specific subtype doesn't really specify the etiology. So we're still waiting on the past psychiatric history. Some of it, you know, is kind of lent to us with regard to his having been in jail. But again, nothing that really allows us to confirm the primary mood disorder versus the primary psychotic disorder. Any other thoughts about Bill?
Just the fact that he was in jail for, I believe, stealing because he owed someone money does seem to support the idea of maybe, just like getting yourself into dangerous situations and impulsivity. Yeah, I mean,
the comment is that the one piece of evidence that the jail time was the result of his stealing due to his owing money may be more consistent with a manic episode, right? High-risk behaviors, incurring debt. and then impulsivity with regard to stealing to cover that debt. That could certainly be part of a manic episode. But again, the question is, all right, now we're going to kind of take that avenue. What more will we find? Will we come up with the 4 additional or the 3 additional symptoms that we are required to see and document in order to rule in a florid manic episode? And again, I think that question really remains to be seen. Observation that he doesn't really sleep that often in the film. Well, yeah. I don't see him sleep at all. I remember him sleeping. So that could be, and again, that's a great job there, because I think when quote unquote normal people watch this film and don't see the character sleep, nobody thinks anything of it, right? I mean, why would you look for character sleeping? The observation that he doesn't sleep is a product of now actively watching this film from a completely different, that is, clinical perspective. And that pertinent negative might actually be more meaningful than the average eye would actually have caught. So I don't disagree that he doesn't sleep. And for a group of psychiatrists and future psychiatrists, it's potentially meaningful.
There also seems to be some element of dissociation because of his poor decision making. For example, when the mule came around, this was threatening them. They went through the hours of gas, filling the gas for the trucks, but then finally destroying the mule. Why not do that in the first place?
Yeah, I agree. So the observation is that there seems to be a deficit in executive planning. And again, it really doesn't help distinguish between schizophrenia versus mania. But you have this character. You have Bill render an opinion that the trucks are not an imminent threat, and I think he even goes so far as to mention that if they wanted to crash through that wall, they would have already. And the reason why they haven't is because they can't. It's because their weight would sink them through the floor. And then he points to the mule vehicle, and he identifies the mule as the imminent threat. So he begins to plan how to disable the mule. And it's just very interesting that he does go outside, and instead of going through the act of wanting or appearing to want to fuel the trucks, but then drop the grenade on the mule vehicle, he actually takes hours, most of the day, fueling all those trucks before dropping the grenade. And that makes no sense whatsoever. That is an absolute deficit in executive planning. But again, while noted perhaps during a mental status evaluation, it really doesn't help clarify whether or not that's more consistent with bipolar versus schizophrenia. Deficits in executive planning or executive functioning / impulsivity can certainly be seen in both contexts. Coming up at 10 minutes to the hour, any final thoughts on Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive?
Could we talk about the soundtrack?
You can always talk about the soundtrack.
Oh, yes.
That's going to go in person. So I've often made the comment, as many of you may have appreciated, this is probably by far the worst movie I have or ever will assign students to watch. And that's by design. Right? It's by design. Initially, to make note that this was Stephen King's director's debut, and he has not directed a single film since. Right? So I think that's noteworthy. That's part of certainly part of a Jeopardy question. So if you're going for double Jeopardy, and when you win millions, I want you to at least reference me and thank me, along with your parents, as your awarded champion. I think more importantly, though, is the role the soundtrack plays here, because the soundtrack is by far the most redeeming quality of this film. Right? It is by far. And I just find it interesting. This is a little bit of loose associating. But the metal band AC/DC is the soundtrack. And AC/DC is energy. right? Taken in a different context, AC/DC is energy. And when we begin to formulate psychosis, which again, I believe Bill demonstrates, we're not going to talk about schizophrenia, and we should not even be talking about bipolar until we first talk about a potential substance-induced mental disorder. And when you merge the idea of a substance plus energy, you come up with stimulants. And from that perspective, this could be a stimulant or cocaine-induced disorder. From that context, we would do the same thing here that we would do with any patient. That would be confirmatory with regard to a urine bloodstream. The other low-hanging fruit with regard to substances, we talked about this with Geppetto, so we could certainly talk about this in the context of that movie we're carrying Pinocchio, again, Maximum Overdrive, is the role of solvents, right? Not pain, as in Geppetto's cabin, but gasoline. Gasoline, like paint, is also a solvent. And there's no doubt that is a central set in this particular movie happens to be a gas station. So the potential etiology of psychosis is staring at us in the face. So, only a couple minutes left. Any final thoughts?
I was going to say, I don't know if this applies to schizophrenia, but a manic episode could be supported by like increased sexual activity.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is not terribly consistent with schizophrenia. It is much, much more consistent and would be much, much more supportive of a florid manic episode. Is there anything in this movie that brought that to your attention? Other than the fact that there's a sex scene.
No, I just thought that because like there are trucks outside when driving, it makes it the perfect time to
You're exactly right. Yeah. And again, I think that's part of the hero mentality. That's part of the grandiosity. Why wouldn't it be a time? So there's that link between the grandiosity and the sexual activity, which does make sense because that would be contained within the same episode called Mania. Yeah, that's a good point.